Okay, in this video I want to walk through how to conduct a phenomenological analysis on an interview transcript. And so I'm recording this for a team that I'm working with right now, and we are analyzing the role that tattoos play in the Black community. So we've asked people of color about the tattoos that they've received, and we're really just interested in the motivation for getting tattoos. How people relate to their tattoos, whether or not their tattoos have been instrumental in times of healing or recovering from trauma or going through like a mourning process, whether they're parts of identity, people identify, or sort of gather their self-concept or even like self-esteem from their tattoos, if the tattoos are performative, if they are a display for others, if they're used as accessories. Really, we have this wide open net that we're trying to cast by asking these kind of open-ended questions and seeing what comes up. And we've got some really good interviews so far, and what I want to do here is walk through the process of how to make sense of the interview once you have them. And part of this will be a mindset that you adopt as the phenomenological researcher. So the approach that you take, and then some of the more concrete steps that you follow. So I've got an excerpt here that was taken from an interview that I had that revealed something kind of interesting in this specific excerpt. The whole interview was about 1 hour, so this represents about maybe 7% of that interview, and something came up that I wasn't really expecting. So I'm going to talk about it generally, and then I'm going to walk through the analytic process. Now, I haven't analyzed this yet, so I'm going to be going through this process for the first time with you, so you can kind of think with me about what's going on. So I guess the first thing that I want to say is, as a phenomenological researcher, one of the first things that you're going to have to do is like flick a switch off in your head. And that is a switch that's there if you were educated in the United States or in the in a Western culture that really privileges the scientific framework. And by scientific framework, I mean like positivism, this idea that there are discrete facts about the way that humans exist and the way that nature unfolds, and I don't know, the universe is like one set of static principles that we have to like go sort of seek out. And so with tattoos, it might be like the topic that comes up in this excerpt is what are some of the concerns that people have, or like the maybe ethical considerations and moral considerations associated with tattoos. The scientific or logical positivistic approach would be, okay, well, what is the answer in the Black community? So there must be some answer. Let's just go find it. And then once we find it, we can like check it off. And now we know for certain what that is. As a phenomenological researcher, we turn that questioning off. We don't assume that there is one answer, or that the answer is sort of clear and easy to communicate. Instead, all we get are examples, instances of morality being considered by a person of color in the context of tattoos. And then by really trying to understand that, we start to get at a structure of how morality functions in the context of tattoos in the Black community, but we don't get a conclusive fact, if that makes sense. So I'm going to flip that switch, invite you to do the same, and we are going to now, this is called suspending the natural attitude, or the phenomenological epoche. With that, I'm going to delete my little screen, my camera, and let's take a look at the protocol. So this is, like I said, it's one part of the interview, and I've just copied and pasted it from the whole interview. I guess if you want to read it, you can pause it and then read through the transcript right now. but I'm going to skip past that because I'm going to get self-conscious just reading it in front of you. So what we have here is a story that this is participant 3 or respondent 3, a story that participant 3 tells spontaneously during this interview. And the story is kind of like meeting somebody in a public place where, I guess I can pull my video back on. Respondent 3 meets someone in a public place and sees that they have tattoos that this respondent 3 would not have gotten. So they're questionable. And that's it. So it's a way of asserting that, so tattoos on the neck, tattoos on the face are taboo to the person that I interviewed. So respondent 3 could have said that in one sentence. I would never get tattoos on my neck. I would never get them on my face. But instead of saying that, respondent 3 couches it in this story, kind of a sweet story. And he goes like this. He goes, I would never, to each his own. I get that people are different. This is not who I am. So there are all these disclaimers. He wants to say, like, I would never get a tattoo on my face. Maybe he has an opinion about tattoos on the face. Maybe his opinion about tattoos on the neck. He doesn't say that. Instead, he kind of displaces that onto this other person that he has an interaction with. And he has this interaction. This person looks at his tattoos and goes, oh, hey, nice tattoos. He goes, yeah, these are my kids. And then respondent 3 goes, nice tattoos, and points to the guy's face. And they have a little laugh. And that's kind of a way to show, I wouldn't have done that. I'm not sure why you would have done that, but maybe there's a story there. And so we get a little bit of criticism. There's criticism about someone who would get tattoos on their face. But we also see, or R3 also shows us that he is a compassionate person by asking for the story. So, like, tell me about these tattoos. And they end up having this interaction, and we get to see how congenial R3 is. And it turns out that this random stranger with tattoos all over his body and his face and his neck got these tattoos while traveling abroad and, like, visiting other countries and other cultures where getting tattooed on the face is actually pretty common. It's only in the United States or, like, the contemporary West where tattoos on the face are taboo. So it's an interesting juxtaposition that R3 comes across. It would almost be immoral to avoid getting tattoos on the face in some of these cultures. So it's like, all right, I can see that. And in all of this story, it's not just, look at this neat interaction that I have. It's not, I would never get tattoos on my face. It is recognizing and appreciating the story that's being told through tattoos, and then knowing that there's more to a person than the expectations that we have or the stereotypes we have based on what it is that we see. In this story, we learn about R3's taboo against tattoos on the face, but we also learn that he's the kind of person who would make room to accept people who have different opinions about that matter. So what I've done so far is just kind of give you the gist of what the story is telling. I haven't quite run through the actual protocol, and I'm wondering if what I've just shared is sufficient, or if we need to run through the protocol. And let's go ahead and run through this a little bit. So I mentioned earlier there are these disclaimers about talking about the neck, getting tattoos on the neck, tattoos above the neck, on the face, all of this. I don't judge people, and then he goes to a story. So when it comes to, like I said earlier, the topic of morality with tattoos, I could easily say, okay, well, apparently there's some presence of, like, a moral compass on where you put the tattoo on your body. It's not just what the tattoo says, but it's also where the tattoo is placed. It would be really easy to just kind of say, oh yeah, people have that as a consideration. But we can see that it's an uncomfortable subject. It's almost like, and let me show that again. So let me show you how this is uncomfortable to respondent 3. Rather than, and I cut out the question. The question was, what are the considerations you had before your tattoo? Since he had mentioned he put them on he's got tattoos on his arms and he can cover those up with sleeves. And so then he goes, oh yeah, absolutely, there were some considerations. But then he stops and he backtracks and he gives these disclaimers, which shows either a worry about contradiction, because on the one hand he has tattoos and some people think you shouldn't get tattoos. So how can you have tattoos and kind of have these prohibitions against where to get tattoos? This was a well-spoken interviewee, and all of a sudden he is tripping over his words. He is backtracking these incomplete sentences. So there's obviously some discomfort, and then transitioning into a story. Again, a story that kind of highlights respondent 3 as an upstanding guy, as a accepting, I think I said congenial, positive, welcoming, accepting guy. And so we learn something just from the fact that it's pretty awkward starting this story. And then he goes into, all right, the story itself. So, matter of fact, funny story. I was in Miami. I was in the mall. I was walking through the food court. My wife was with me, and it was a guy. We were actually going out, and he was coming in. And man, he was bald-headed, so everything was tattooed. Everything was tattooed. And we kind of bumped, coming in the same door, kind of bumped each other. Now, during that, while he was telling the story, I was visualizing him going out and like bumping shoulders, which can be a kind of macho man aggressive, like, you don't take up my space. So when he was telling that, he said, like, we bumped, but then he was very careful to show that it was a polite bump, and we both said, I'm sorry. And I thought that was kind of funny that he had to like make that pause and situate that social interaction in a positive light. So again, there's all these extra acts that respondent 3 is doing to kind of show that he's not judgmental, he's not trying to be hurtful towards others or arrogant, and so on. So everything was tattooed. So I said, excuse me, and he said the same thing. I had on a short sleeve shirt, and he said, man, nice tattoo. And I said, man, nice tattoo. But because it was so much, and he started laughing, and he said, so again, with this part of the story, we can imagine someone getting offended, but respondent 3 was careful to kind of show that, oh no, my uncertainty about him being tattooed on the face, it was accepted by this person. And so it was a very positive interaction. And he said, I got this tattoo in like Maui or somewhere like each one of his tattoos, and we literally had a conversation. So he's unsure of kind of how to tell this story, but I can gather from what he shared so far, this person's traveled, and perhaps one of those places was Maui, and he gets tattoos in each of these places that he travels. He had some trouble thinking of what the company was he worked for, but it was an international traveling company. He always get tattoos, and so I'm telling this story because if it wasn't for his tattoos, I probably would have never had a conversation with this guy. And then there's something I missed right there. So it was a way for me to talk to him, kind of get inside of his mind and ask, why would you get tattoos, you know? And he said, man, you know one thing, and I remember him saying, this is funny, and that's when he talks about, he really tries to accept the cultures that he visits, and part of that means like getting a tattoo. And then he gives that kind of, he addresses that contradiction of respondent 3 having tattoos and feeling that they're okay, and then looking at someone else and saying, well, you have tattoos and those are not okay, and kind of trying to find this medium. So what more am I gathering from it? Well, earlier when I started this video, I gave the gist, how like, okay, there are moral considerations, and there's some ambivalence about those moral considerations, by which I mean it's okay to draw the line somewhere, and your line may be different from someone else's line. And again, this is communicated by respondent 3. Apparently, there's a line that everyone must draw, and just because someone's line is further out than yours doesn't mean they don't have a good reason for it. And it can be uncomfortable to look at where your line has been drawn and compare it to where someone else's line has been drawn, and then try to say, okay, well, your line is too far. Well, my line is further than some other people's. And so actually, when we're talking about considerations or moral considerations with respect to getting tattooed, just because some people have tattoos doesn't mean they don't look at tattoos as taboo. And just because someone doesn't have tattoos doesn't mean they're really different fundamentally from someone who does, because both have a line drawn somewhere. And maybe for one person the line is short of any tattoo on the body, but even someone like this person that I interviewed who had, I think, like between 6 and 10 tattoos, there was a line he wouldn't cross. But even in interacting with people who would cross that line, he's like, it totally makes sense that they would do it. I'm trying to think of a good way to put this. That you can accept that other people have lines that are somewhere sort of different than your own, and how there's a common trait there. So, and that trait is that both have drawn a line and have been comfortable going up to that line in terms of body art. So what have we gotten further by kind of walking through this? What I was going to say, throughout the interview, I now remember, and it makes sense because I'm focusing on kind of where this line is drawn and how there's these inner contradictions that R3 is sort of facing, and we see that contradiction through all the disclaimers he feels he has to make, the care with which he tries to show how accepting he is in this interaction when this person clearly represents a crossed line with respect to R3's considerations. Throughout the interview, he repeatedly talks about where his tattoos were, how big they were, when he got them, how old he was when he got them, and all of this was a way to kind of show that it was above board, so to speak, that he has a line and he hasn't gone past that line. And I think what we're going to see in a lot of these interviews is that that line is a consideration. Everyone has a line drawn somewhere, and maybe where that line falls will change. Another thing that contributes to that line is the meaning behind the tattoo. I think one of the biggest reasons why R3 justified his tattoos, and no one said he had to justify them, but he sort of took that on his own, that they needed to be justified, that tattoos needed to have a significant meaning. And so for R3, it was family and religion were the two big pillars of meaning. And if someone had a tattoo that didn't relate to family or religion, then it was like, are you doing that just because you want to look good or look cool? And that to R3 was not an okay motivation. So I feel like one of the themes that's going to come up, at least in the millennials that we interview, maybe Gen Xers as well. I'm not sure about the Gen Zers or Alpha, if we interview any Alphas. If everyone's going to feel the need to justify that they got tattoos, because that's a pretty big hurdle that has to be navigated. So anyway, all of that is present in this short excerpt. And actually, with that line being crossed or not being crossed, down here, notice when he's talking about tattooed faces within our culture, he says the American quote-unquote civilized countries, there we have a social term for where that line is drawn, that in civilized countries or civilized cultures, the line is much lower or higher, however you want to put that. So the line is drawn so that there's not quite as much space above it. Because I'm not really sure how to make that metaphor work. But the line changes when you're in civilized versus uncivilized countries. And he even kind of questions that idea of it being civilized versus uncivilized with the story that he tells, because and he concludes, it was a beautiful story, just like this person, which he calls a gentleman, and so again he elevates it. So it's this play between, are tattoos taboo? Are they okay? Can they be civilized? Can they be gentlemanly or genteel? Or are they evidence of someone who doesn't take care of themselves, who is irresponsible or disrespectful? These, of course, are 100-year-old stereotypes, at least in Western cultures. And so, even though tattoos are very popular right now, almost 50% of millennials have tattoos, which is shocking. There's still this need to sort of defend the tattoos that you have, or justify them, rationalize them, and we see that even in this interview. Even this very short transcript, this like little excerpt, there is a lot of evidence of the ways that the tension reveals itself. The tension between, is it okay that I got a tattoo? Is it okay that they got a tattoo? And how do we navigate that question? Now, I want to pause right there and do one more thing, which isn't actually in the transcript. It isn't in the protocol. It wasn't in the interview, but it's part of the phenomenological method. And I'm hoping that I've revealed some of... actually, let me do one more thing. Talk about the existentials. And so this is kind of borrowing from Heideggerian phenomenology, or existential phenomenology. When we're analyzing these protocols, not only do we perform the phenomenological epoche and look for what's beyond the written transcript, but we're also looking at things like relationships. So here, respondent 3 talks about his wife, but she really isn't part of the story. It's this interaction between a random stranger. And so we can see tattoos as a vehicle for sort of promoting relationships with others, in particular strangers. And throughout the whole interview, family was really important to respondent 3. And so we understand tattoos through his relationships. We can also talk about time is another existential, time, how time is lived. Something doesn't really jump out to me with time with this little excerpt, other than it takes time to see lots of places. So we can imagine the stranger that he ran into didn't always have tattoos all over his body, but as his experiences got richer and expanded, so too did the canvas of his body in terms of the tattoos that he got. And we get the sense that it was kind of a long conversation. This wasn't a brief conversation in passing. Stories were told. Let's see, what else do we have? Embodiment. And so these two people, R3 and the stranger, they bumped into each other. They bumped into each other with their canvases. The canvases were on display. They were seen. Their bodies were seen. They were physically interacting and sort of interacting at the level of their skin, and the tattoos, the images, the representations that were on their skin were revealed. They were on display. And so that was and then through those, we got to see stories and kind of history and experiences. When you look at my face, for example, like you can see my beard and my glasses and my hair, and those are what you see. That's what you're interacting with, and my voice. And then through that, you can kind of maybe make some judgments about me, or have some expectations. Like if I had a scar, that might tell you something about my past. The stuff behind me tells you a little bit more about my personality, maybe. And so this is what you're interacting with. So we can look not just at what the words are in the interview transcript and what sort of assertions are made, what's represented there. We looked at relationships, time, embodiment, the way we engage with space. Space is interesting with tattoos because the body is not the same as like a canvas. So over here I've got a canvas of the transactional analysis circles. That's a flat rectangle. Well, the body has contours and shape, and like the skin is pliable and dynamic. And so taking up space with tattoos, or creating space, maybe a tattoo creates space on a body for attention and awareness and storytelling. We can look at space. Let's see what else. Mood. Uh, so mood is like emotions, the kind of mood state that we're in. Notice what this respondent 3 with his arms exposed, showing the tattoos of his names, the names of his children. It's hard to be an a-hole when you're representing your kids. I gather from this interview that I gave. And so if someone interacts with him, he needs to act in a way that represents his children and his grandmother and his deceased friend and all of these tattoos that he's carrying with him. And so if he's going to be a jerk, then his kids are going to have to sort of bear some of the brunt of the consequences of him being a jerk. And so mood is portrayed as well. I think there's one more that I'm not thinking of right now. Maybe it's like being towards death. And I guess that's an interesting one too, because with tattoos and you have mortality, the idea of something permanent. We don't get much that's permanent in our lives, but tattoos are one of those things. Even after we die, our skin still represents or still shares those stories, and so perhaps they live on in a kind of unique way. Anyway, so we went beyond the transcript to look at some of those existentials. All of those are at play throughout these interviews and the tattoo analysis. My guess is some will be more important than others. The last thing I wanted to do was the step called free imaginative variation, and this is where we look at what's not there and wonder, if we were to introduce a new factor, a new variable, would it change the meaning? And if not, then it's possible that the experience is broader than we hear. If we add something and it changes the meaning of the experience, then we know that that's not part of the experience. So for example, if in this conversation respondent 3 had tattoos on his arms, but they were covered up, would the interaction still have taken place? And the answer is no. So there had to be a violation of a line. Even if it's not respondent 3's line or the stranger's line, there has to be the unspoken assumption that some people do not like tattoos on the body at all, that they have a prohibition against tattoos, because R3 in this story was violating that, which provided the grounds for this interaction to take place, for the recognition to occur. If R3 had been wearing fake tattoos, I don't imagine the same interaction would have taken place. If respondent 3 had been a jerk and been critical of the tattoos on this stranger's face, I don't think the same interaction could have taken place. So it had to do with openness. Openness was an important part of this. The fact that a taboo had been committed, at least a little bit, not in anyone in the story's opinion, but the possibility that socially a taboo had been committed. In a public place, could it have happened in a more private setting? My guess is it wouldn't have been the same kind of situation. So like at a dinner party, two people who don't know each other, you would almost expect the congeniality because it's someone's house and like these are friends that know people that you know. You would almost expect it to be politeness and not a real kind of authentic interaction. But because this happened in public, when you're never going to see this person again, you don't know anyone who knows them, the fact that there was a polite interaction about these supposed social taboos, it's more remarkable, and therefore I think the setting would have to be public. So what I'm doing here is thinking beyond what's present. What in the story has to be the way that it is in order for the story to still be the same, convey the same meaning, and what if we were to add to it would change the meaning of the story. It's a way we can kind of play around with the structure of the phenomenon that we're interested in, which in this case is considerations that go into having tattoos. So I'm hoping that, I mean, I didn't cut out little excerpts and then put them together to like create a new story or anything. I just walked through the analytic procedure And I think I showed you about 8 or 10 different ways of looking at one interview transcript and a very small bit of it. You also get to see how I connected parts that were highlighted in this section to other sections of the same interview transcript, and then eventually across transcripts to look for common themes. The method that I'm borrowing here is Amadeo Giorgi's descriptive phenomenological method, which he applied to psychology. It's been applied more broadly than that, but I like it because it's a very systematic way of going about this process. And he, of course, was very trained in, and is still, I'm not sure if he's passed away. He was trained in Husserl, Merleau-Ponty. I'm familiar with Heidegger. And so he's drawing on all of those. There are other phenomenological methods that I think are very good as well. I just happen to prefer this one. So hopefully this helps you maybe as an introduction to the analytic process itself by looking at a real protocol and how one phenomenological researcher engages with that protocol. I didn't mark anything up yet, but you can imagine that I will. But I already feel like I understand this respondent a lot better just by analyzing one, maybe 20th of the entire interview.